Good morning, friends. Welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery for another sutta study. So this morning we will be continuing the series of Dhamma for householders. So this morning in particular, we'll be seeing how does the, practical ways to actually practice the Noble Eightfold Path if we're not wearing the robes, but we are householders with lots of different duties. So we will be looking at two particular suttas that I will put in the comment section right now. And one is the Dhammadina Sutta. Samyutta Nikaya 55.53. And the other one is the Mahanama Sutta. Samyutta Nikaya 55.37. But before we start, we can start by paying homage to our original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha, the reason we are all here gathered today. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham namam sangham namassami. And good to see you, Jayanta, Geeta, Michael, and Anita and Ian. Welcome, friends. So I will be starting by reading from the Dhammadina Sutta. So you will have the translation from Bhante Sujata, and I will be reading from instead Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. So the sutta begins. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Varanasi in the deer park at Isipatana. Then the lay follower Dhammadina, together with 500 lay followers, approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, and sat down to one side. Sitting to one side, the lay follower Dhammadina then said to the Blessed One, "Let the Blessed One, Venerable Sir, exhort us and instruct us in a way that may lead to our welfare and happiness for a long time." And the Buddha says, "Therefore, Dhammadina, you should train yourselves thus. From time to time, we will enter and dwell upon those discourses spoken by the Tathagata that are deep in meaning, supramundane, dealing with emptiness. It is in such a way that you should train yourselves." This is quite an unusual teaching that the Buddha gives to householders because it's quite actually, elevated. So he encourages householders to contemplate the discourses, the teachings of the Buddha that deal with complete cessation of all things, that deal with understanding the nature of reality, so understanding emptiness. So basically, actually, all the teachings that Bhante Sudazo likes to give a lot here on our channel. So there's some of the most favorites. So I know that you actually contemplate these teachings already. A lot of you definitely do. But then we see how the sutta continues, where Dhammadina says, "Venerable Sir, it is not easy for us, dwelling in a home crowded with children, enjoying Casian sandalwood, wearing garlands, scents, and unguents, receiving gold and silver, from time to time to enter and dwell upon those discourses spoken by the Tathagata that are deep in meaning, supramundane, dealing with emptiness. As we're established in the 5 training rules, let the Blessed One teach us the Dhamma further." So essentially, even though those discourses are delicious, and perhaps sometimes if we go on a meditation retreat, we can practice in that way. We can practice contemplating emptiness. We can practice silent illumination, essentially, or animita samadhi, or however we want to describe it in words. But it's quite difficult to actually do it when a lot of things are going on in our lives. So as householders, usually one has a pretty busy life. So perhaps one, is married or has a partner, has children, or has different people, depending on one. Also, one has not taken particular vows as a monastic, so usually they are surrounded by a little bit more sensual pleasure than monastics are. So as the householder says here, use garlands, scents, and unguents. So essentially not following the 8 precepts, but following only the 5. So using, things that embellish us, that decorate us, that makes us look better to everyone else, smell better, attract others. So not living a celibate life. And also, of course, dealing with money, which has its own whole series of implications to the mind. And so the lay follower Dhammadina we see here is very, somewhat realistic. He's like, okay, so this is, my situation every day. I have a lot of different sensory inputs. So the release of all things is quite difficult. Contemplating emptiness when the mind is full of so many different things is quite challenging. But he also mentions, as we are established in the 5 training rules, essentially, we have taken the 5 precepts. Let the Buddha encourage us, let the Buddha teach us the Dhamma further. And the Buddha says, therefore, Dhammadina, you should train yourselves thus. We will possess confirmed confidence in the Buddha, in the Dhamma, in the Sangha. We will possess the virtues dear to the noble ones, unbroken, leading to concentration. It is in such a way that you should train yourselves. And Dhammadina says, Venerable Sir, as to these 4 factors of stream entry taught by the Blessed One, these things exist in us, and we live in conformity with those things. For Venerable Sir, we possess confirmed confidence in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. We possess the virtues dear to the noble ones, unbroken, leading to concentration. It is a gain for you, Dhammadina. It is well gained for you, Dhammadina. You have declared the fruit of stream entry. Quite magnificent, right? This is such a beautiful sutta that, somewhat starts with a struggle from the householder and actually ends with a declaration of stream entry. But it's quite beautiful how the Buddha leads actually Dhammadina to the realization of stream entry by saying, okay, well, of course your life is busy, but still, as we've seen over and over through our series of sutta studies, this path is applicable and walkable by everyone, whether we have robes or not. So sometimes we focus so much on meditation practice. So sometimes we focus so much on understanding both intellectually and experientially lofty concepts like emptiness. But actually, we're not stream enterers yet. So what do we need to do? Well, first of all, establish ourselves in the 5 precepts, and then cultivate virtue. Very important. So we see that Buddha makes this, creates the conditions to highlight this direct correspondence between Sila, between cultivating Sila, unbroken, and leading it to concentration. And so I want to now go to Samyutta Nikaya 5537, so the Mahanama Sutta, where this is somewhat expanded a little bit better. And so the sutta begins, on one occasion the Blessed One was dwelling among the Sakyans at Kapilavatthu in Nigoroda's park. Then Mahanama the Sakyan approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, sat down to one side, and said to him, "Venerable Sir, in what way is one a lay follower?" This is already a very great question. The Buddha responds, "When Mahanama, one has gone for refuge to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, one is then a lay follower." So a lot of times, I have to say, we get... I hear people saying, the Buddha didn't invent Buddhism. There's no such thing as a Buddhist, and all these like fun sort of intellectual concepts, essentially saying that the Buddha did not create a religion, and that Buddhism is just a technical term. But in reality, if we want to get... that's kind of like a word game, as I like to say. There's actually quite a strong sort of definition of what actually it means to be a Buddhist. And there's a definition for what it means to be a Buddhist in a monastic form, and what it means to be a Buddhist in a lay form, and definitely eat both of them if they're followers of the Buddha. Take the refuges and the precepts. Well, us monastics, we also take the 5 precepts because they're embedded in all the other precepts that we take, of course. So nobody can escape the 5 precepts. But it is something that you will see across every single Buddhist country, every single Buddhist culture. It doesn't matter if you are chanting it in Chinese, or if you're chanting it in Pali, or if you're chanting it in Japanese, or in Korean, or whichever language, in Thai, in Sinhala, in Khmer. There will always be taking refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. And so that is actually, even in my current life, that's when I started using the word Buddhist. I did not use the word Buddhist lightly, but rather it had a meaning. And when I embraced the teachings of the Buddha out of faith, then I started calling myself a Buddhist. But actually, I did not start calling myself a Buddhist even until I actually took refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. So it was very interesting. I didn't plan it. I wasn't like, okay, now I'm going to use this word after this, but rather it made sense. It made complete sense. So this is essentially what it means to be a Buddha. You take refuge not anymore in trivial things in the world, not anymore in your fridge, when you come back from work and you're all full of dukkha. You don't take refuge in the TV or in Netflix or in YouTube, not the Dhamma channels, but all the sort of time-wasting channels. You don't take refuge in alcohol anymore, but you actually take refuge in the Supreme. You take refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. So that is a definition that here the Buddha is very clear. And that is what we mean when we say, once again, the word Buddhist. So in what way Venerable Sir is a lay follower accomplished in virtue? And we see that this is connected to what we were talking about earlier. And so the Buddha replies, when Mahanama, a lay follower, abstains from the destruction of life, from taking what is not given, from sexual misconduct, from false speech, and from wines, liquor, and intoxicants that are the basis for negligence, the lay follower is accomplished in virtue. So one is accomplished in virtue when one has the 5 precepts. They are essentially not precepts anymore, and precepts means training rules. So they're not training rules anymore, but they are second nature. So we have eradicated essentially the impulse towards destructing life. Right? Perhaps we come to Buddhist practice with a lot of tendency towards killing. Killing insects, killing mosquitoes is definitely a favorite of a lot of people, unfortunately. So We start with small creatures, sometimes larger creatures. In the United States, people like to go hunting as a sport, for example. So that's very common to find people who will go fishing over the weekend or hunting larger beasts over the weekend. It's significantly less popular in Italy, where I come from. So I never actually heard of anyone saying that. But here in the US, it's significantly more common. So we see that one can, from a small insect, go to a larger insect, and then a larger insect or larger animal, and then go. Some people will also kill other human beings, unfortunately, and that, of course, is even worse. But we see that the impulse towards harming is somewhat the same in all of these different scenarios. So we want to eradicate that impulse. And first we take it as a training rule, and then the more we train into something, it becomes second nature, and then first nature, hopefully, becomes Buddha nature. And then taking what is not given. So not stealing, but also not entering a place and just taking anything that, once again, has not been given to us explicitly. That's why it's also very useful to come to a monastery where we actually have all of these rules, and actually also the lay people here are practicing in a very monastic way, because you really see the impulse, for example, of opening the fridge at whatever time you want. And if you're in a monastery, the food in the fridge is only given to you at specific times, and perhaps not even the whole contents of the fridge, but rather just a few items that are in the fridge. And sometimes you like those items, sometimes you don't like those items, but you don't have the quote unquote freedom to practice, craving. So you can't just open the fridge and take, ketchup if there's only mustard on the table. You practice taking only what is given. And so if there's only mustard given on the table, you practice contentment with that. And so that creates the conditions for eradicating wanting to take things that don't belong to us. So we train with that, and then it becomes second nature, and then first nature, Buddha nature. Then from sexual misconduct, that in Buddhism, essentially that means consensual sex. So non-consensual sex, sorry. So essentially using sexuality in a responsible way, not imposing our sexuality on others, but rather making sure that anyone, whether they are the opposite sex, the same sex, whether it's one person, multiple people, whether one is straight or not, whether one is male gender, female gender, transgender, non-binary, doesn't matter. All of those things are completely irrelevant. The important thing that one has to focus on is that everybody's on the same page, that everybody's in agreement. And then that is actually holding the precept properly. And then from false speech. So this is actually something that as soon as we take this precept, we start seeing how the tendency towards lying also for a nuisance. White lies are very, very common, and they come so spontaneously in our mouth, right? So we need to train ourselves to actually eradicate that tendency towards deceiving others. And so after a while, we're not able to lie anymore. And it's so comforting, actually, so reassuring to be in Buddhist communities when you're like, oh, nobody lies. I can trust these people. It's very great. Yeah. So we start cherishing these wholesome qualities, and then training ourselves to create this field of safety for everybody around us. And then the last precepts of refraining from wine, liquor, and intoxicants that are the basis of negligence. So we're trying to establish ourselves in mindfulness. Obviously, anything that creates, dullness or confusion in the mind, which is basically every single intoxicant that we've mentioned, is not particularly beneficial. And also, usually, once you break the fifth precept, you break all the rest. So we don't want to do that either. And so after a while of practicing in this way, you don't even feel the necessity, the need to actually use such intoxicants, because it feels really well to be present. It feels really good to have a clear mind. And so when we don't break these precepts, we are fully accomplished in virtue. And then the lay follower asks, in what way, Venerable Sir, is a lay follower accomplished in faith? And the Buddha replies, here in Mahanama, a lay follower is a person of faith. He places faith in the enlightenment of the Tathagata thus: the Blessed One is an arahant, perfectly enlightened, accomplished in true knowledge and conduct, fortunate, knower of the world, unsurpassed leader of persons to be tamed, teacher of devas and humans, the enlightened one, the Blessed One. In that way, a lay follower is accomplished in faith. So we see that this is an elaboration of basically what it means to be a lay follower to begin with. So we take refuge at the very beginning in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, but then we establish ourselves in faith. So we really understand, we really take this as a working hypothesis, and we start worshiping the Buddha. We start cherishing the qualities of the Buddha, because those are the qualities that we're trying to emulate, that we're trying to develop in ourselves. So first and foremost, it's important to understand that enlightenment is possible. So if we don't think that the Buddha is a fully enlightened being, then we won't be doing the work to also become enlightened ourselves, right? And so it's important to recollect on the incredible qualities of the Buddha. We do it in every single morning here at Empty Cloud Monastery, in every single monastery in the world. That is usually at the beginning of the chanting, right? Recollecting the incredible qualities of the Buddha. Then we recollect the incredible qualities of the Dhamma, and then the incredible qualities of the Sangha. And so the Buddha is an arahant, perfectly enlightened being, accomplished in true knowledge and conduct. So that means that we don't question the teachings, for example, of karma and rebirth. Or if we question them with critical thinking. So we question them by taking them as a working hypothesis, and we ask questions rather than questioning them. We don't refuse them, but we actually come into the path with a willingness to understand, what does this mean? Why did the Buddha teach karma and rebirth? What are the implications of karma and rebirth? Whatever we don't understand in the suttas, we take them as a working hypothesis. So this is very different from blind faith. This is having faith in someone, but with having confidence in the Buddha, but not truly believing our pre-existing wrong views. So that's what we need to question. We don't need to question the enlightenment of the Buddha. We need to question our own beliefs. So usually, for example, when we talk about karma and rebirth, we come to the table with pre-existing ideas that are dependently arisen from other either faith systems, or other secular systems, whatever it is. Well, our duty is to understand where are these coming from and how do they match with the Buddha's path. That's why it's not blind belief. So just believing in things is not particularly useful. But doing this work of understanding things the way they are, experientially looking at our experience and how everything is dependently arisen. In that way, one starts seeing also the cycle of karma and the cycle of birth. And so recollecting how the Buddha is, a fortunate one, the knower of the world, unsurpassed leader of persons to be tamed, teacher of devas and humans, the enlightened one, the blessed one. Yeah, so the Buddha was an incredible teacher. He is actually an incredible teacher. We still have his teachings. We still have the Dhamma. So we can see how it is applicable whenever we follow it, something experiential. And so we want to actually cultivate actively this nurture our faith, this quality of faith, this quality of saddha. And then the Buddha, the lay follower continues, in what way, Venerable Sir, is a lay follower accomplished in generosity? And the Buddha replies, here, Mahanama, a lay follower dwells at home with a mind devoid of the stain of stinginess, freely generous, open-handed, delighting in relinquishment. One devoted to charity, delighting in giving and sharing. In that way, a lay follower is accomplished in generosity. And it's so interesting because we see how usually whenever we talk about letting go in Western sort of contexts, there's so much emphasis on meditation retreats and on the practice of concentration and the practice of mindfulness and concentration. But actually, one of the main ways to practice letting go is actually through generosity, through dana. So we see how that has been the practice of the majority of Buddhists, of lay followers, for the past 2,500 years, since the time of the Buddha. And so we think that it's a minor practice, but actually it's a supreme practice. It's a practice that brings to stream entry. It's a practice where you're cultivating relinquishment. You're practicing letting go. You're practicing, treasuring what is the foremost. And this create the conditions to remove that stinginess, that craving, that wanting to hoard as much as possible for oneself, which is the opposite of letting go, which is the opposite of the joy of missing out, of JOMO. And this is, one of the most beautiful things that one sees whenever one is surrounded by people who are born Buddhist and have been practicing for so many years. You see the beauty of their of this generosity, the beauty of just giving to anyone, regardless of where they're coming from, and whether it's the monastic sangha, of course, as the foremost, but to any single person. We were going on alms round a few days ago in New York City, and a friend of mine from my previous life within this life, who is not Buddhist, that she came with her daughter, and people were so welcoming. We were surrounded by Thai friends, and they took her and her baby, invited her to partake in the meal, actually exhorted her to also go and get some food to donate to the monastic sangha. It was just like all a practice of generosity, but the joy of generosity. It wasn't a practice of like, oh, I am renouncing this thing and it feels like really painful. I'm just doing it because I've been told that I have to do it, but rather it's actually something beautiful that feels nourishing, right? So one delights in giving and sharing, as it says here in the words, delights in relinquishment. So you see, in fact, the average born Buddhist, as soon as they sit then in meditation, a happy mind gets easily concentrated. So they have a very easy time to stay still and meditate. It's incredible. It's remarkable to see that. And we see, in fact, the last point, in what way Venerable Sir is a lay follower accomplished in wisdom. Here in Mahanama, a lay follower is wise. He possesses wisdom directed to arising and passing away, which is noble and penetrative, leading to the complete destruction of suffering. In that way, a lay follower is accomplished in wisdom. So essentially, paying attention to the quality of impermanence. And one can do this both in everyday life, you can see how everything is constantly changing, and then taking the time to sit and contemplate impermanence. Contemplate how everything is in this constant state of flux, right? We can be very busy, but then that also ceases, and then we can be still. But then that also ceases, and then we get up, and it's busy again. And everything is constantly changing. And doing that, contemplating that creates an establishment. One establishes oneself in mindfulness, and then becomes more and more accomplished in wisdom. And so we see that this then creates the conditions that lead to the cessation of suffering. So one becomes a stream enter by cultivating these qualities of faith, virtue, generosity, and wisdom. So essentially, saddha, sila, chaga, and panya. Okay, so I think that's all that comes to mind. Oh, good to see you, Marielle. And hello, Venerable Tejo. Madhavi, good to see you. Patricia, welcome. Hello, Michael. Who says, when I watch dumb YouTube films, play computer games, I'm taking refuge in them. I haven't thought of that. Yes, absolutely. So it's very important to check constantly our mind. How is this affecting us? And yes, usually, we're bored out of our minds, and we want to escape that suffering, that dukkha that we experience on a daily basis, whether we pay attention to it or not. There are different types of dukkha, there are different types of suffering. There is the extreme suffering, of course, of old age, sickness, and death, but there's also those sort of more common types of suffering, of boredom, of dissatisfaction, of just depression, light underlying state of depression of going, this is not really that great. So we tend to distract ourselves. We tend to go and seek forms of escapism. And in the United States, there's the entertainment industry is so strong, is so wrapped up actually in the lives of everyone, because it has been studied on a scientific way of how every single human being experiences dukkha, and how every single being, if exposed to certain sensual pleasure, will respond in a particular way. And so all these games and shows and whatnot, they were designed to enthrall us, but they're not the solution to the dukkha. Actually, they create even more dukkha. We're just not really aware of it. And that's why we take the precept of refraining from all of this. So then we can actually see how unsubstantial they are, and how actually they fuel our discontent. They fuel our delusion. They fuel all those unwholesome habits. They fuel our craving, because they're pretty addictive. Once you start playing a game, it's like watching a soap opera. Just no matter how bad it is, you want to kind of, know what's coming up next, or what is the next level. It's designed to trick us in that way. So we refrain from it altogether. We actually take refuge in the foremost and cultivate what actually leads to the end of suffering. And Michael says fifth. What fifth? I assume you're talking about the fifth precept. Yes, that's correct. You should practice the fifth precept, which is not using intoxicants, because that also creates that obliviousness and you forget how unsatisfying playing that game was. So you actually want to recollect it over and over again. And good to see you, Sal. I haven't seen you in quite some time. And Maria, Nang. So if you have any comments or questions, feel free to type them in. Otherwise, we can end for this morning. And let's see. Antonio says, grazie everyone. Ayya Soma. A presto rivederti in Italia. I hope so. Yeah, we're going to Italy in a few weeks. So I look forward to meeting you as well, Antonio. And good to see you, Hayden, as well. All right, so there doesn't seem to be any other questions. Dhamma Learner says, thank you for these householder talks. They have been very helpful to me. Yeah, I'm quite happy to hear that. It's important to understand that actually, whether the Buddha is talking to, householders or monastics, these teachings are always applicable. Doesn't matter. I read these things. It doesn't matter that when I read these suttas, I perhaps was a householder at one point, and now I'm a monastic. But they are relevant. They were relevant back then, like they are relevant today. So it doesn't really, like, the form is not as important as we think it is. What we need to understand is, what is the Buddha trying to communicate to us, and what is suffering? Let's understand how suffering manifests in our lives every day. What is the cause of suffering? What is the end of suffering? And what is the way out of suffering? And we can practice wherever we are in the path. And as Ajahn Pasando said recently, when we invited him for the talk, at the time of the Buddha, there were more stream enters that were lay people than there were monastics, because there will always be more lay people than monastics. So obviously it's a number game, right? So you all have the ability to practice this path and enter the stream, which is the most important thing, really. And Patricia says, Ayya, could you please share some words about skillfully dealing with anger? Yeah, well, we actually gave so many different talks on the subject matter. So I actually recommend that you go on our channel and actually Google that and search for that in particular. Ayya Vimalanyani and myself actually had a conversation a few weeks ago on that topic in particular. But yeah, I would say just briefly, first and foremost, to understand. So that's why meditation practice is very important. Because in meditation practice, when we sit down, there's not much going on. So we do the practice of observing our mind when we're not dealing with other people, when we're not dealing with particular circumstances. And we start seeing, all the latent tendencies. We start seeing also how it feels like. How does, for example, if we sit down and our mind is angry, what does anger feel like without having to actually respond to it in one shape or form? Or how does it feel to have a happy mind? Or how does it feel to have a neutral mind, a bored mind, whatever kind of state that we're in, or how does it even feel to have a body? So we practice in that way to becoming tuned. And then if we start seeing, is this actually like a pleasant state, for example, an angry mind or an irritable mind? Not really. Is it actually pleasant to have a generous mind? Actually, quite yes, it's pretty nice. So we start understanding how certain mind states or certain states of being are, useful or something that we want to nourish, and some others are instead harmful, something that we don't want to nourish. So we get that first and foremost experientially there in our, like, as a knowing. We know that, rather than, oh, the monk told me that it's bad to be angry, or I even tell myself that it's bad to be angry, but I can't help myself from being angry, and I can't help myself from dealing with those people that make me angry, and actually they are pretty obnoxious, so I'm right to be angry. And so, do you see what I mean? We start creating a lot of different ideas and a lot of different wrong views in our mind. So when we start meditating, and there will be many times, plenty of times, that we will, be irritable or angry. Even perhaps if we weren't angry to begin with, but maybe we start our meditation practice and the neighbors put music on, and then we'll get all irritable and angry. Watch that anger. What does it feel like? Very unpleasant. Oh, yeah, this is not for my benefit. This is not for the benefit of others. And this is not for the benefit of myself and others. So you establish that knowing, that understanding of the unwholesomeness of this mind state, and then you uproot it. Then you don't tolerate it. Then you nurture the opposite. You nurture a mind of loving kindness. You nurture a mind that actually is beneficial, that you want to dwell in, and that also other people want to relate to. So as we practice this way, then when we are in triggering situations, we can act more skillfully. We can, first and foremost, as soon as anger arises, we can start feeling it. We're like, oh, that is anger. Well, I will not act upon it. I will let it appear and disappear. Actually, we start, establishing ourselves in wisdom, going, okay, this is impermanent. This is something that has been caused by different, causes and conditions and habits that I put in place in the past. So now I'm experiencing the result of it, and it's okay. It's impermanent. It doesn't belong to me. It's just no different than a cloud in the sky. It's no different than a car coming on the street. It will appear and it will disappear. In this way, I can allow for this this sensation to appear and disappear without fueling it. So usually what we do is this appears, we get irritated, our habit comes, and then we get a nice tank of gasoline and a match, and we light a big fire, and then we're all, and we burn together with the fire. So we want to stop ourselves from doing that. We can't do anything about the consequences, but we can control the causes, as we like to say, right? So in that way, we stop putting more causes for anger to arise in the future, and we start putting instead more causes for loving kindness to occur in the mind. So I hope that answered your question. And Antonio, there's no reason to apologize for your bad English. My English is pretty bad today as well. But that's also impermanent. All right, so that's all for this morning. So we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And if you have any questions, please bring them this evening for monk chat at 7:30 p.m. New York City time, and we'll try our best to answer them. May you all be well and happy, and may all good things come to you.